the revolution he was part of, the reaction he was killed in, the reforms he died fighting for. This is the story of Louis Tikas, an immigrant marginalized by history.
Louis became an American citizen in January 1914 and was shot in the back by American soldiers about 4 months later, April 20th, 1914. So to me, it's a big story about immigrants in America.
The Ludlow Massacre is one of the bloodiest labor disputes in American history and part of the broader Colorado Coalfield War. Striking coal miners were attacked by militiamen, and Greek labor organizer Louis Tikas and many innocent women and children died. Tikas's union leadership, which was shaped by his Hellenic heritage, was influential in the immigrant revolution against Rockefeller and helped spark national outrage that contributed to labor reforms.
We think about the Ludlow Massacre, that's what people hear about, are the women and children that were killed. What they don't understand is the thing that really brought everything to a head and started to get some sort of response from governmental agencies is that it was a war. It took over all of southern Colorado.
The Ludlow Massacre is a tragic event that represents a lot about the nature of an immigrant society like America. Over 400,000 Greeks immigrated to the U.S. at the turn of the 20th century. This first wave of Greek migration coincided with American industrialization. John D. Rockefeller Jr. owned Colorado Fuel and Iron Company, a major producer of coal and steel. From his perspective, profit for stockholders was more important than the safety and fair treatment of mine workers. This attitude, along with a lack of federal labor laws, enabled mine companies to exploit immigrants as a source of cheap labor.
There were no employment laws at that time. In 1914, everybody who worked in a mine was an at-will employee. Unionization was in 1914 when Ludlow took place. It was in its embryonic stages.
Many Greeks who arrived in the U.S. went out west to work in the mines. As new arrivals, Greeks faced discrimination and were excluded from some jobs in public areas.
There's a lot of anti-immigrant feeling in southern Colorado at this time, just as there is in America right now. And you would go into a train station in a place like Pueblo, and you might see a sign on the wall that would say, "This waiting room is for Americans only. No Italians, Greeks, Mexicans, etc."
They were looked down upon as being sort of primitive and uncouth, and of course they were uneducated, that's for sure.
My papu, Kandaris, had a second grade education in Crete. Now, you know, if you can't count and you can't read, you're pretty easy to cheat when you're paid by the ton. So these guys would do a lot of work that they weren't paid for because they were cheated.
The Greeks who worked in the coal mines of Colorado brought a revolutionary attitude and a sense of justice because of their history fighting the Ottomans.
In Greece and in the Ottoman Empire, they also learned not to be subservient to institutions, to question institutions, and to fight for justice. So they learned from their own cultures not to acquiesce, not to, in a sense, bow down to the authorities. So I think that was one part of Greek culture that made them into easy revolutionaries. It wasn't difficult for them to join the struggle and pick up arms.
While the Greeks' military background made them into easy revolutionaries, Rockefeller and others viewed them with prejudice and hostility. Louis Tikas immigrated in 1906. He was intelligent and learned English quickly. He was also a talented organizer and joined a burgeoning labor union called the United Mine Workers of America. The union had many complaints about the mining industry and company control over workers.
Again, some of them weren't paid in American currency. They were paid in what was called a script, and this was just, for no better term, funny money.
The miners fought for union recognition, improved working conditions, and better wages. While these are basic rights today, the idea that poor, uneducated immigrants would fight for fair treatment was revolutionary. Rockefeller ignored their demands and the miners went on strike in September 1913. The Union set up 10 colonies during the strike. The biggest one was called Ludlow and became home to 1,200 immigrants. By October, violence had escalated between the strikers and company guards who were basically hired thugs. The guards patrolled the 10 colony in an armored car called the Death Special. At the request of Rockefeller, Colorado National Guards came in as well. This force demonstrates the corporate and governmental reaction of intimidating poor, uneducated immigrants who had no legal protection. Louis Tikas was now a valued organizer for the Union and used his leadership skills to unite the many ethnic groups of the 10 colony.
He acts like a peacemaker, right? He's not provoking. And actually, in fact, he was hired as a labor organizer in order to put discipline to the Greek immigrant miners who tended to be more militant.
What is interesting about Louis Tikas is he became the unofficial mayor of the Ludlow tent colony. There are 24 different languages spoken in those tent colonies. And so that shows you that he was a kind of gifted organizer. And in that sense, too, we could call him a peacemaker.
As a peacemaker, Tikas embodied the Greek concept of philotimo, which contributed to his effective leadership.
Is a word that you cannot translate into English, but it means to be brave, to have honor, etc. And definitely, because of his philotimo, because of his sense for justice, he was ready to sacrifice.
On April 20th, the tension of the strike came to a head. Shots were fired into the tent colony, and the miners fired back and fled into the hills. Women and children sheltered in pits underneath the tents, but they later suffocated to death as the tent colony burned down. It is not known who fired the first shots or who set the tents ablaze. During later testimony, a National Guard officer admitted that the men had ceased to be an army and became a mob. In the midst of this chaos, and while trying to evacuate the tent colony, Tikas was captured and shot by militia.
Louis was hit 3 times. And died there in the gravel.
Louis Tikas, peacemaker and leader of the Ludlow tent colony, had been assassinated in the corporate and governmental reaction to quell the miners' revolution. While the media coined it a massacre, it's really a battle because both sides were armed. A battle in which a lot of innocent people got killed. A battle not just for labor rights, but for equal rights and human rights. It was a battle that could not be won on peaceful terms. The Union ultimately lost the fight, but Rockefeller's reputation suffered terribly. The national news coverage inspired protests, and the struggle contributed to the ongoing fight for union recognition and labor reforms.
It is the formation of a working class identity that goes beyond ethnic identity. That was the major contribution of Tikas and the Greeks.
He was part of the Union cause, which is hard. It's hard to remember now that unions have been so marginalized in America.
There was women and children and men that died at the site to make life better for all of us. And I've always said that I stand on their shoulders as a worker, and a lot of the rights that I enjoy today was the sacrifice that they did, back in that time.
I don't like to think of him as a unique hero. I think of him as one of many. There was a Chinese Louis Tikas. There was an Italian Louis Tikas. There was a Mexican Louis Tikas. And many of these people are lost to history.
Louis Tikas and the Ludlow massacre do not live prominently in our national consciousness, and perhaps it is due to this habit of forgetting that we are experiencing a resurgence in anti-immigrant attitudes. Will the Hellenic heroism of Louis Tikas remind us about the ruthlessness of corporate power and marginalization of immigrant struggles in American history? Or will our collective memory erase these immigrant struggles of repression and violence?